Hey everybody, this is Erica, the technology nerd who likes to film stuff. Good morning! It is time for the full review of the iPhone X, and I'm actually going to make this a comparative review against the iPhone 8s. It makes sense because they each inform each other, but it's still an in-depth review. So let's check them out. Hopefully I can help you decide which device is for you. Let's go! So first I want to talk about the look and feel of these devices and what's new. In this review, I have the iPhone 8 Plus to show, but I will reference the smaller iPhone 8 at times too. So starting with the iPhone 8 Plus, it's an iPhone as we have known it to be for the last several years. We've got the same size, aluminum body, the same buttons just as we know them, big bezels on the front with an IPS LCD display, the same 1080p or 750p resolution for the smaller iPhone 8, and that home button with a fingerprint sensor, which I have always loved. But now on the back we have glass for wireless charging, and the Apple logo can no longer get scratched like before. Then we also still have no headphone jack, and it's gone. Don't expect it to come back. Now in comes the iPhone X, finally a reimagining of the iPhone. So when you look at it, it unmistakably still looks like an iPhone, but an iPhone evolved. So instead of an aluminum frame, we have stainless steel. I find that my space gray version is less susceptible to hairline scratches than my silver one. And my silver one even came scratched out of the box, and I returned it. But the silver iPhone can be polished to buff out the scratches. And the space gray can't because you're going to wear off the coating. But even if I could polish my phone, I'm not getting anything abrasive near any of those ports or the display. In hand, the 10 feels very premium. I just love to pick it up and hold it. It feels curved, heavy, and very sturdy. Just don't drop it. It will crack, and it's insanely expensive to fix. So a skin like one of these from one of my favorite companies, Colorware, make a very nice solution. So they have ones that just protect the back only and also the sides. And then they also offer some extra options such as these pieces to cover the glass on the iPhone X. You can also purchase ones that cover the front. They have a variety of different colors and finishes, so if you're curious to check these out, I'm going to put a link below in the description. And I have to thank them so much for sponsoring my video and for making content creation possible. The camera is now rotated and everything exists in its single space. I think it looks cleaner this way, but it does protrude a bit. Button placement is similar to previous iPhones, but now we have a large multifunction side button where that power button / lock button used to be. And with it, we can produce several actions in combination with other buttons, and we will get into that, but it's really very different than anything that we've seen with iPhones before. There is a glaring omission this time around, the home button. Instead of a home button, we are now to use gestures that take a bit of time to become second nature, but they do. And now I think nothing of swiping up from the bottom of the display to go home. And I will get more into the gestures in its own section in a little bit. Instead of Touch ID that was integrated into the home button, we now have Face ID, which isn't always as fast or accurate as unlocking with a fingerprint. But when it works, which is like 90% of the time, depending on the environment, it's very seamless, and I don't even have to think about it. As long as I'm in line sight of the camera, I can even go and look at it from an angle if it's sitting on a desk and it will unlock. Continuing on with the front of the iPhone X, it is all screen. Gone are the bezels of the iPhone 8s. And I'm going to miss the bezels because I actually like them. It's something to hold on to. But even though the front is all screen, we've also gained a notch that holds a lot of tech for the true depth camera system, but it is slightly intrusive. The display is a 5.8-inch AMOLED display manufactured by Samsung, so it's top-notch, literally, no pun intended. Finally, a display with a bit more resolution from Apple. It's 2436 by 1135 versus the past max 1920 by 1080. Though truly 1080 pixels up to 1125 pixels across is not that much of a difference in resolution. So spec-wise, what the iPhone X's OLED display resolution really improves upon is the smaller iPhone 8 with only a 750p resolution. And in the screen section, we're going to talk about all of this a lot more. Now, as for the size of iPhone X, we finally have another size of iPhone for the first time in years. It is closer in size to the iPhone 8. And for people with small hands like myself, I think it's a really good in between the 8 and the 8 Plus. It's definitely more manageable than the Plus, and more desirable than the 8 because of the larger high-resolution display. And lastly, like the iPhone 8s, the 10 has no headphone jack, so you must use the included adapter in the box or pay attention that the earbuds you are grabbing to take with you are the ones with a lightning cable that Apple included in the box, or when you get to the gym, you're going to have a rude awakening like I did. At least the stereo bottom and front firing speakers improve a bit on how the iPhone 8s sound. They sound a bit richer to my ears and somehow less tinny. Now moving on to talking about navigation and buttons, which is probably the most profound difference between the iPhone 8s and the iPhone 10. Navigation with the iPhone 8s is the same as it's always been, and the home button is at the very center of most navigation. So if you press on it once, it's going to turn on the phone and unlock it with that fingerprint sensor that is built into the home button. If you want to exit out of an app, press on the home button once, goes to the home screen. Want to switch between applications? Double press on the home button and you can pull up all these cards. You can swipe them away. How about to talk to Siri? Press and hold on the home button. What about Apple Pay? From the lock screen, double press on the home button. How about taking a screenshot? Hold down on the home button and the power button at the same time. Let go. Screen reachability, double tap on the home button. Not double press. Now I can reach everything, well, kind of. Now we do have some navigation features that are not dependent on the home button, but they depend on swipes instead, such as to access the control panel up from the bottom or the notification panel. So you can see here that this home button means a whole lot. So it really scared me when they said they were getting rid of the home button for the iPhone 10. I thought maybe they would get rid of some of the features that I really like from the iPhone 8s. But thankfully, we didn't have to lose any features. So indeed, the iPhone 10 is completely different. There is no more home button, so everything is done now with a combination of gestures and button presses. So this is definitely a learning curve, but it is a doable one, and one that I have even begun to like. It's kind of weird going back from the gesture-based interface of the iPhone 10 back to the iPhone 8. And it feels like this is probably the direction we should be moving towards in general. So without the home button, unlocking is now done with Face ID or with adding a PIN or password. So just tap, it looks for your face, I hold it up just momentarily, and it's unlocked. Swipe to complete. Some people think that this is a really long process, but it's actually really not at all. I can pretty much just tap to turn on, and by the time I've already swiped up from the bottom, it's recognized me and unlocked. So it's not this crazy arduous process that people are saying that it is. So to go home, just swipe up from the bottom. To switch between applications really quickly, just swipe your thumb along the bottom there and you can see you can switch back and forth. Then if you want to dismiss applications, do an up to the right type of an L and it's going to pull up the cards. That is the fastest way to do it, up and right. Then press and hold and then you can swipe away. That, I agree, has a little bit more steps to it, but I feel like doing that gives a bit of a lock so you don't accidentally get rid of applications you don't want to. How about talking to Siri? Well, now she's pretty much got her own button right here on the side. Just hold it down. There it is. How about Apple Pay? Well, now you just double tap on that side button and it pulls it up, uses Face ID. How about taking a screenshot? Use the side button and the volume up button just for a split second. Now, the thing I can say about taking a screenshot is because the way the buttons are situated, if I take my phone out of a case or if I grip it wrong, I'm accidentally taking a screenshot all the time, which is insanely annoying. It was a bit more deliberate when there was a home button and having to hold on to the home button and the side button. What about screen reachability? I was certain that this one was going away. Just swipe down from the bottom there. And there you go. Very straightforward, very easy. How about to turn off the device? Obviously, you can't push and hold this because that brings up Siri. So you just need to press and hold on either the volume up and volume down and the side button at the same time. So you see that brings up power off. It does the same thing with the up button as well. What about calling 911, such as if you're on the trail and there's someone spooky behind you? I don't know. As a lady, that's a constant worry. Tap the side button 5 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Stop calling. And actually, it's the same thing with the iPhone 8s. You do the same thing with the side button. So how about to access the control center and the notification panel now? Well, you just pull down from the top and there you have your notification center. And actually, you can pull from anywhere except for right here on the right. The right side of the notch is specifically for the control center. So some people have been confused, thinking you can only access the notification panel from this side of the notch, which isn't true. It can be from anywhere, just not from right here. So all of the features are still there. You can access your camera just the same as before. You access notifications the same way from the unlock screen, just pull upward like this. So all of this is kind of tricky and takes a while to learn, but I'm starting to really like it. Now moving on to talking about the screens, the tech between the two devices, and the calibration. This is a very important topic to approach in some depth because the screen is the biggest part of the phone that you interact with. The iPhone 8 Plus has a fantastic IPS LCD display with a resolution of 1080p at 5.5 inches or 750p at 4.6 inches for the smaller iPhone 8. They both support the P3 wide color space, but use sRGB by default. Then the iPhone X has a 5.8-inch OLED display manufactured by Samsung with a resolution of 2436 by 1125. And it also supports the P3 color space and uses sRGB color space by default. So thinking either display is inherently more saturated due to the P3 color space support is entirely false. Most things are shown in sRGB. Apple switches their display profiles automatically to match the content. So for example, you'll see this wider range of colors and pictures taken from the iPhone that you can view in the gallery, and in some places in apps. This is the first time that Apple is using OLED, and one thing that people keep pointing out is the resolution. It is lower than other top-spec AMOLED displays out there, such as with the Galaxy Note 8. The iPhone X has 458 pixels per inch versus the Note 8's 521 or even the S8's 571 pixels per inch. So it's not as sharp as some desire it to be, but in all honesty, it looks just fine. You can't reasonably make out pixels at all. Now something interesting. When comparing the iPhone X to the iPhone 8 Plus, iPhone 8 Plus has 3 subpixels per pixel: red, green, and blue. And in different combinations of intensities of these subpixels, you get all the different colors that the display can produce. So this is known as RGB stripe, and the iPhone 8 also has this arrangement as well. Then you look at the iPhone X, and it only has 2 subpixels per pixel. So each pixel has either red and green or blue and green subpixels. This is a pentile arrangement Samsung uses in diamond matrix form. So even though the pixel density is 458 pixels per inch on the iPhone X, red and blue are only operating at half the overall pixel resolution. So this means that the iPhone 8 Plus ends up looking sharper than the iPhone X in some places, such as if you're looking at reds or blues. So this is interesting, but most people are not going to notice or care. I just wanted to mention it. Before moving on further, I wanted to mention that the glass on the iPhone X has a great oleophobic coating. My goodness, it just glides when I put my finger across it. It feels like a shame to put a screen protector on it. And because that oleophobic coating is so nice, it also cleans very easily. So if there's fingerprints on it, just slide it in your pocket. When you take it out, it's pretty much clean. Resuming, taking a look at how the displays look and their calibration, you can't go wrong with either display technology. That is, if your display doesn't have some weird kind of defect like the green lines some are seeing on the 10 or weird textures at lower brightness. Which, by the way, my 10 has neither of those problems, and we're not seeing any of those issues on the LCD displays of the iPhone 8s. Both displays get nice and bright, and I can see them easily outdoors. What's nice about the iPhone X is that it has more contrast than the iPhone 8s because of that OLED display, which is delightful in everyday viewing. The iPhone X also has darker blacks than the iPhone 8s, as the OLED pixels are truly off at black. And the iPhone X is the first iPhone to truly support HDR10 because of its wide color gamut and contrast ratio. Both phones are closely calibrated to sRGB and have a high degree of color accuracy. The calibration of the iPhone X is my favorite of all the OLED displays that I have seen. This is also true for Apple's LCD displays as well. Apple really cares about getting the calibration right. So if you would like to know more about the calibration of the iPhone X and how Apple did with this first OLED display, yes, it belongs to Samsung, but Apple very much had a say in the calibration, please check the video above or the link in the description. But I have to emphasize that both displays look fantastic. The iPhone 8 and the iPhone 8 Plus's displays are as good as ever. And between the iPhone 8s and the iPhone 10, both are bright and easy to see with very nice looking colors. So now moving on to this last part of the display section, there are a couple of extra things that I want to note, the first one being True Tone. So all of these phones support True Tone. So if you go underneath the control center, hold down, you can see that here is True Tone on and off. And basically this is going to adjust the white balance of the display to match the ambient environment. So the reason for this is that if there's a very warmish ambient surroundings, you won't have a very stark contrast. Just say a very cool looking display against a very warm environment, that just doesn't look nice for some people. So it more looks true to what the rest of the environment looks like. So that's really nice. But the issue that I'm having is that I find that the iPhone 10 just looks too warm. I actually love True Tone on the iPhone 8s. Both of them looks great. And I actually prefer to keep it on, but when I compare them side by side, my eyes just can't get used to the iPhone 10's too warm of white. I'm sure that there are variations. Let me know what you think about your iPhone 10 and how warm it is. But for me, it just never appears to be white. It just messes with the colors too much. Everything ends up just kind of looking pea yellow. So that's not attractive. Let me know. Another interesting thing that I have found is that we can't find auto brightness anymore, but it does exist. And Apple has hidden it away in iOS 11. So go underneath General, then under Accessibility, Display Accommodations, and there is auto brightness. I think they did this in preparation for the iPhone 10 so that people don't cause burn-in very quickly with their displays. This is an OLED display. It is susceptible to burn-in. So that is my thought. So with this iPhone 10, yes, you're going to want to keep this auto brightness on, especially if you're not display savvy. Have I experienced burn-in yet is a question that I'm going to get. And no, I have not experienced any burn-in yet. But if I use a high contrast image such as this checkerboard right here, and if I keep it on here for several seconds and then switch to a gray background, I will see the checkerboard remaining just for a couple of seconds. Once I start using the display again and all the pixels refresh themselves, it's fine. That image does not remain. So it does have a little bit of image retention, and this is typical of AMOLED, so don't worry about that. Another thing that you can do to prevent burn-in, or at least prolong the life of your AMOLED display, is to make sure that your auto lock setting is something reasonable. So I have mine set for 2 minutes. Don't ever leave it on never. If you do that, that's a sure way to get burn-in. So just pay attention to that. You just need to have a little bit of extra care with an AMOLED screen. I haven't seen any image retention issues or burn-in with my LCD screens. And yes, it can happen on those too. So nothing yet. It's been fine. Does have some image retention, but it goes away. Another thing that I'm hearing some people say is that the iPhone X's display is very fatiguing to look at over time. This is not a complaint with the iPhone 8 or the iPhone 8 Plus. They're using different display technologies. So this is an OLED display. And this display flickers due to pulse width modulation that is being used to dim the brightness of the display. And this flicker is most bothersome at lower brightness. So it kind of creates a strobe-like effect, and it causes some eye strain and headaches for some people. Not all people. So those who are coming from an iPhone with an LCD display are noticing this new fatigue. And that is most likely why. I have had Samsung OLED displays for some time, so this isn't an issue for me. I think LG does not use pulse width modulation to dim the brightness. There's been some talks of Apple using some LG displays later on. I wonder if that's the reason. I don't know. Although I have not been convinced by LG's mobile displays, though their TVs are great. The very last thing that I want to address personally is how bothersome is this notch. So at very first, my mind could not deal with this notch. I would try to ignore it. I personally don't care if there's a notch there or not. But my eyes would be like, ooh, anomaly. No, that's not supposed to be there. And I would go about my business trying to ignore it, and then I would see it again. And it caused headaches for me to look at for a while. But you get used to it. I still very much prefer no notch. If I was given a choice anyway, like I don't care what Apple does, honestly. But this is going to work better for everybody. If you want to, as you're training yourself to get used to this notch, I would recommend an application that's called Nacho. So that is essentially going to hide the notch for you. So here's the background I have right now. You can see it's carved out this nice little area here. So let's go ahead and set that. So now here we have my notch training wheels. It's made that notch disappear. This is black here. And this has actually been a lifesaver for me as I've been getting used to this notch. So that actually looks pretty good. The only thing is that once you leave the home screen, you have that notch again. So people will get used to it. Yes, it does interfere with some content. Thankfully, when watching videos, most things are going to have the 16:9 aspect, and because this is an OLED display, the rest of the pixels are off. They're black, so it just looks like an iPhone 8 now, for example. And honestly, when you're viewing 16:9 content, the display is not much bigger than the iPhone 8's little display. Really, I think what the solution is going to be is just to have an iPhone 10 Plus. That way you get a larger viewing space with the 16:9 aspect. So the notch is Apple's choice. I'm sure it's not going anywhere. Oh well, get used to it. I'm sure we'll get a bigger iPhone 10 eventually. And for me, that'll probably solve my complaints. So, cameras. What about cameras? I feel like this needs to be a video kind of all of its own. But just in this video, I want to talk about some features and also some performance differences. And I do have a video that I made a while back that focused on the iPhone 8. I compared video quality to the Galaxy Note 8, so click that right here if you're curious. So specs, let's start off with the camera specs, starting with the iPhone 10 here in the middle. Up top right here, we have a 12 megapixel main camera. It's got optical image stabilization and f1.8 aperture. And then down here at the bottom, we've got a 12 megapixel telephoto lens. So that's going to give you 2x optical zoom. It's got optical image stabilization as well with an aperture of f2.4. Then taking a peek at the front, we have a 7 megapixel f2.2 camera. And we're going to talk about this whole camera layout here for this true depth camera system. So as far as video resolution, we can record at a max of 4K at 24, 30, and 60 frames per second. This is a crazy loaded phone. Then we've got the iPhone 8 Plus, and you can see that the orientations are different, and this is a bit more simplified in appearance. But we've got that 12 megapixel main sensor here as well. It's got optical image stabilization. It's got an f1.8 aperture lens on it. And then we've got the 12 megapixel telephoto lens. There's no optical image stabilization on this one. It's f2.8 instead of f2.4 like the iPhone 10. So already we're stepping down here in features. And we've got the front-facing camera, and this one is the same, 7 megapixels, f2.2. And again, this can record in 4K at 24, 30, or 60 frames per second. Then we have the little weakling right here, the itty bitty. This has got, curiously, the least amount of features. I don't know why Apple does this, but we've only got one camera. It's the same main camera as the other two devices. It's 12 megapixels, optical image stabilization, f1.8 aperture lens, and we've also got that 7 megapixel camera with an f2.2 aperture lens. And thankfully, this has the same video recording capabilities as far as resolution. We can shoot in 4K at 24, 30, and 60 frames per second. So obviously, this one has the least amount of features. And then we lead all the way up to the iPhone 10, which has the most amount of features, all these bells and whistles for the cameras. So the iPhone 8 can't do any of the new portrait or lighting features because it does not have the second camera, and that's used for depth. And then we have the iPhone 8 Plus here, which can do 2x optical zoom, just like the iPhone 10. You can do the portrait mode and the portrait lighting, but only with this back camera. And that's what brings us to the iPhone 10, where we can do all those things. So 2x optical zoom, the portrait mode, portrait lighting, and we can also do those things with the front camera because of that true depth camera system. And with this front-facing camera, we can do other cool things like unlock our iPhone with Face ID. And we can also do that cool Animoji thing where you can make yourself look like you're a piece of poop talking. So let's talk a little bit about this lighting effect thing. I have some examples right here. What I can say is it's very beta. Apple says this themselves, and it's really more for a party trick, and I really don't take it too seriously right now. But I really do like that you can change the lighting effects after the fact. So as long as you took a portrait photo, I can go in and change the lighting. So this is natural light, studio light, contour. You can see it really makes my cheekbones stand out. Stage light, and this is the one that tends to have trouble. You can see this bit of blue here that was from the background. You can change it to stage light mono, and that does help a little bit. Much of the time, though, I find that these portrait effects make me look kind of sickly. I think this is supposed to be the contour mode. So not very attractive, but still fun to play with. And of course, you can do this with the front and back cameras. You can kind of get some interesting type of artsy effects. I was just really messing around with this. This is from the back cameras of the iPhone 8 Plus. Mostly though, I found this mode to really just freak me out because you can see sometimes it doesn't know what is background and what is foreground, and it's cut out my eyebrow and also my eyeball, so I've only got one eyeball here. Little freaky. So I'm excited to see what they do with this eventually. This does not replace photography in any way, or knowing what to do with lighting in photography and video for that matter. But it shows where we're going with this. So taking a bit more of a fair peek at Animoji, it's really neat that Apple is able to track 50 different muscle movements with this true depth camera. The thing is, when you make an Animoji, you really don't have all that much time to do it. You can only do it underneath text message and you only get 10 seconds. You can see the counter counting down there. If you do want to have longer Animojis though, such as if you want to do the Animoji karaoke thing, then I would go under settings and you can see there's control center, customize controls. Make sure that you add screen recording because now from the control center, you can see that I can hit screen recording and it's going to count down and start recording the screen. So now I can make little Animoji characters to my heart's content. I now have no limit. I can save and export this, and you can see that this works quite well. Now it doesn't record audio, so what you're going to have to do is record your audio separately. Right now I'm recording audio separately as it is, so I'll just sync this later, and it just looks like I'm a pig, and I'm a piece of poop, and I'm also a chicken. So that's fun. And then when I'm done with my silliness, I just hit stop. So let's take a look at the true depth camera system a little bit. I know we all make fun of this notch here and how it's just taking up part of our image, as you can see, just like this. But what all is in here? So we have an infrared camera. We've got the flood illuminator, which sends out infrared light. We've got the proximity sensor. This helps the phone know how close to your face it is, such as if you hold the phone up to your face and you make a phone call, the screen turns off. We've got the ambient light sensor. So this helps us with automatic brightness, for instance, and also helps with true tone. Then we've got the speaker, microphone, then we've got the 7 megapixel camera that we have right here, and that dot projector, which sends out 30,000 infrared dots. So I was actually able to test this true depth camera myself and really see how this dot projector works, which was pretty cool. So let's look at what I was able to capture. So when you use Face ID and you hold the phone up to your face, the flood illuminator right here is activated first. So that helps to light your face, especially in a dark environment. And it only ends up using the dot projector once the phone realizes that it has my attention. Once it has my attention, the dot projector goes off, sends out 30,000 little infrared dots, and then the infrared camera takes that information, and that data is then sent to a secure enclave in the A11 Bionic chip to confirm the match. And this is the match image that you set up in the very beginning. It is also able to learn over time and update its model so that you can grow a beard, for instance, or you can put on makeup or wear glasses. I have seen this feature being fooled with identical twins, but I've also noticed that it gets smarter after you use it over and over again. It really starts to learn your face and any differences. So it makes me wonder if after a month or two, if the model will be updated and smart enough to where an identical twin can try it and it won't work. I'm curious about that. So it's pretty cool. There's a lot of hardware right here. It's essentially an Xbox Kinect. Right there. I would like to see Apple open this up and use hand tracking, for instance. I don't know what for, but Apple says that this phone is going to be doing things in the future that it's not doing now, so maybe they'll figure something else out to do with this at the top. Now let's take a look at some test samples between the iPhone 10 and the iPhone 8 Plus. Of course, the iPhone 8 is included as well. So looking at photos from the main lenses, what I've noticed is that there isn't a profound difference between them. Nothing that I can really see that isn't a circumstantial difference. Like it was framed just a little bit differently, and because of that, there's a little bit different color processing or white balance. Photos are more beautiful and appear to be more stylized than last year, but HDR looks gorgeous. I can see that Apple has upped the saturation of the photos. They definitely look less natural to me now, but they pop more, and that's really what people want. At least most people. Especially because these phones support the DCI-P3 color space, and the AMOLED display has a lot of contrast it can show with AMOLED. It doesn't surprise me that they want photos to pop. Video samples look very similar as well between the devices, and in my testing it was pretty hard to tell any real difference between them. Again, if there are differences, I feel like it's more circumstantial. So I would say that it's pretty safe to assume that processing from the main camera is pretty much the same between these iPhones. Where we start getting differences are with the telephoto cameras. So the iPhone 8 is not included in this. The iPhone X's telephoto lens is a bit wider angle than the 8 Plus's, so that's 52mm equivalent versus 57mm. But the biggest thing here is that the iPhone X has optical image stabilization on that second lens, so it can afford high shutter speeds and lower ISO. Now in daylight this doesn't make too much of a difference, but in lower lighting, such as when using the portrait mode, iPhone X has more detail and is brighter and has less noise. And that's definitely because it can have a longer shutter speed and a lower ISO. So if you're into portrait mode indoors or in darker type environments, you're going to want to go with the iPhone X. Also, the optical image stabilization makes a huge difference in video when you're using the telephoto lens. So the iPhone X can handle zooming in while moving around and remain fairly stable, but the iPhone 8 Plus is very shaky and sometimes looks unusable. Video is where I will normally use that second lens because I don't really use the portrait mode and I don't really use the 2x optical zoom, but it is pretty nice in video if I want to have a different focal length. So overall, the iPhone X is a better camera system than the other phones. You can do more with this front camera, and though the main cameras might take identical photos, differences really start to show up when you start using the telephoto lens. So it really depends on what you're going to use the camera for. I rarely use the telephoto lens or use any of the fancy portrait modes, but when taking video, like I mentioned, I do appreciate being able to zoom in and use a different focal length. And at least I know that my video won't be all shaky. So in this last section, I want to talk about performance between all of these devices and also battery life and charging. So starting off with just talking about iOS 11 and the experience, I have noticed a lot of frame drops and stutters. So the interface can kind of be jittery at times, and it's this way on all of the phones. This is just an iOS 11 thing. But still, all of the devices are nice and responsive, and they operate like an iPhone in a heavily controlled ecosystem. Now, all of these phones have the latest A11 Bionic chip inside of them, and the iPhone 8 Plus and the iPhone X have 3 GB of RAM, while the iPhone 8 only has 2 GB of RAM. So the iPhone 8 Plus and the iPhone X can keep more web pages open, for example, without having to refresh, or they can keep more apps open in the background. So these are better at multitasking than the iPhone 8 is. But these are all zippy phones, apps open and web pages open and refresh quickly, so I'm really not so worried about there being less RAM on here. It's a mild annoyance. Looking at the CPU and GPU performance of these devices, these are overall the most powerful devices out on the market. And in aggregate, after a lot of real-world and synthetic testing, they all perform about the same. Except the iPhone 8 has overall less pixels than the iPhone X or the iPhone 8 Plus, so the GPU scores sometimes come out a tad bit higher. And the iPhone X has the most pixels, so it sometimes shows to be ever so slightly behind the other two in GPU performance. But seriously, overall and in everyday use, I can't tell any difference between them, except for RAM, so multitasking. So overall, except for some stutters and frame drops that I see on all of these devices here and there, they are fantastic and responsive and fast at everything that they do. With Apple's tightly controlled ecosystem, you are guaranteed a consistent experience. Now moving on to battery life. So starting with the iPhone X, this easily lasts me through the day, no problem. I get about 7.5 to 8 hours of usage time very easily. Then my iPhone 8 Plus easily lasts me through 2 days. It's really hard to kill this phone. It's one of those phones that I can leave the house when it's at 20% and feel confident that I will make it through at least half the day. So I can get about 10 or more hours easily of usage time throughout the day. And then we have the iPhone 8, and admittedly, I have not used it as much as either of these devices, but I can tell you that I can get through the day okay, but if I start doing intensive things with it, I'm going to need to grab for my charger. Now, talking about charging, what's really cool about these devices is that they all support wireless charging. I can just set it down on this charging mat here. And what's nice is that Apple just released an update for the wireless charging, so it charges more quickly now. It used to charge at 5 watts, now it's 7.5 watts, but when you look at the Galaxy Note 8, it can charge it up to 15 watts wirelessly. So this is a nice feature to have for sure on these devices, but this is not the fastest wireless charging out there. I find that it's mostly okay if I just want to set it down on this charging pad overnight. It's going to charge all the way. If I'm just being mindless and I don't want to fiddle around with cables or anything, it's really nice just to be able to set it down and it will top up. But I'm really hoping in the future to be able to charge these quicker so that it actually makes sense to have this wireless charging and not just a Me Too type feature. I think that the most insulting thing that Apple does to its customers is that these support fast charging when plugged in, but you have to buy an adapter for it, and you need to have a MacBook charger, for example, or even an iPad charger to take advantage of faster charging speeds. They give you that cheapo little tiny 1 amp block in the box. That's nickel and diming ya. I mean, I've got my OnePlus 5 right here. Love this phone. This is the fastest charging device out on the market, at least that I'm aware of. I can plug this puppy in, and in an hour, it's already done. And when I look at these guys, it feels like it's at a fraction of this. So not cool, Apple, not cool. Now lastly, for this very final review tidbit, how about what makes a phone a phone? Connectivity. Looking at Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, GPS, I haven't had any issues with any of those, thankfully, although I have heard plenty of issues with Bluetooth connecting, and people having issues with getting it to connect to their car or disconnecting. It's been a mess with that. I expect updates will probably help. I've heard some issues with Wi-Fi. I haven't personally had any issues with those. GPS has been just fine on all of these devices. A perfect peach. Although at the very beginning of having my iPhone 8 Plus, whenever I would take a phone call, I would hear clicking in the earpiece. And that was quite annoying. But I have not experienced that lately, and Apple said that they would be getting rid of that anyway in a future update. That's not something I've experienced at all with the iPhone 10. I think the only other thing that's worth mentioning that I've experienced is that when I turn the volume all the way up on the iPhone 10, this isn't applying to either of the other devices, I will get clipping sometimes. So clipping in the audio is what I'll notice. I've looked online for that, and it looks like some units do that, others don't. I don't tend to blast my volume really loud, so I'm not complaining about it. But that's just something to look out for. As for using them as smartphones, they're all great. They all work very, very well. So now to wrap this all up, you can't go wrong with any of these devices. The iPhone 8 is nice, but it's pretty far behind in some aspects, especially for the price. Now the iPhone 8 Plus has a lot of really great features as well, but I've got 256 gigabytes of storage on this thing, and it cost me the same as the iPhone 10. They're both over that $1,000 mark. So at this point, if I'm somebody who really wants the camera system and that new screen, smaller body, I'd probably just go for the iPhone 10, honestly. This is where Apple is going. It's the overall winner in several different aspects. The screen on this thing is absolutely gorgeous, and I do miss the fingerprint sensor, but at least Face ID works pretty well. Though interestingly, I do actually prefer the swipe type navigation versus using the home button. So I've kind of been converted to that. I find it to be quite nice, and it's intuitive after some time, and it's just really starting to make sense. With performance, they're really all about the same, except for the RAM being better on these ones. I think you're going to be just fine with the battery life on either the iPhone 8 Plus or the iPhone 10, although the 8 Plus seems to last longer, even if it technically has a smaller battery than the iPhone 10. So Apple is doing some pretty cool stuff with this. I'm really excited to see where they're going to go in the future. Is this my favorite iPhone of all time? I would say yes, if it didn't have this notch obstructing everything. I really am curious to see what they're going to do later on. I would honestly put the notch up a little bit right here and just have a normal 18:9 aspect with no notch. I don't mind having just a tiny bit of bezel. It gives something to hold on to. So you guys should let me know what you think about this. Is this your favorite iPhone? Or do you still prefer one of the iPhone 8s? So this has been Erica, the technology nerd likes to film stuff. Please rate, comment, and subscribe. Hopefully I helped you decide which of these devices is for you. Please subscribe to my channel if you want to see more videos like this. I make a lot of in-depth reviews. I know they take some time, but I hope that this was worth it. Thank you again for watching, and good night.